What's up, Shred Sexies? Welcome back. You knew it was coming. Basically, the combination of scales and arpeggios, but there's so much more to it. Synergy, me sort of syncing up the blues scale now with the dominant 7 flavor. This kind of idea where you take two elements like scales and arpeggios and you start to sequence them together into a much bigger lick or practice exercise. It's really important that you actually exercise these higher order music functions like synergy. So you like this blues scale, I want to bring out the real bluesiness of it by doing this other element that complements it. Now, can you do a lower level one? Sure. But that's the whole point. You're sharpening your skill set so that you can make that determination in the moment, of course, and then choose the appropriate tool, whether it's going to be dominant 7 or diminished or whatever it is. The next one is obviously choosing approaches and then using outside sounds. Of course, it's the same, usual suspects and all the rest of that. But we're going to go through all of it. I'm going to show you some examples. They're all killer. No more yip yapping. Let's get into it. Okay, in that first example there, I'm basically exploiting the bluesier elements of like the major position, the Ionian position, right? So I'm doing the Ionian pentatonic and I'm playing a major triad arpeggio. And essentially I'm adding a flattened third on to get the blues scale at the Ionian pentatonic, and then I dress up the triad arpeggio to a dominant 7 flavor. And boom, Bob's your uncle. I basically get this complementary flavor of the blues scale with the dominant 7 arpeggio. Job's done. Now, the most important thing here is in the second half of that performance video, you see me basically slow it down and just do the constituent parts. So it starts off with just the major pentatonic. That's the core information. Then I'm adding on the flattened third. I'm like, that would sound cool. And so I start to flesh that out. And then I'm like, oh, look, I'll go from this Ionian position into Dorian so I can extend it out so I can move back. Again, pre-planning to move back into the Ionian position so I can now do dominant 7 from the Mixolydian position. If you're getting all this, you are amazing. But this is how it works. You got to think like that. Be like, okay, I'm doing this root inversion from the Mixolydian position. You got to basically have this encyclopedia in your mind of choosing the shape and just applying it to a scale degree. In this case, from the 5th, move it down to the 1st degree to get dominant 7. Okay? So, not only do you get the synergy there, but of course, you're also now getting the practice value of mixing and matching these two systems together, which is, of course, going to set you up for the mindset to be able to just move interchangeably between them, which is another big one. Which is also why we're practicing it. It's not just for theoretical purposes or to, be like, oh, I'm the shred master. It's also for practical purposes where you can just instantly move from a scale to an arpeggio and it's effectively fluid. Right. So this is going to be true about all the examples now. So I'm not going to go over that point where I sort of do the performance, but then I slow it down to this sort of more subdued constituent parts one, where you'll see me basically label to a certain degree the kinds of elements I'm using and combining together. And that becomes the important roadmap to then follow in your own practice sessions to be like, okay, start off with this and then go to this and then just work that idea until you come up with something you're like, yeah, sounds pretty good. Done. Let's move on to the next section. All right, this is the diatonic approach. We're starting off in A Dorian, obviously the second degree of G major. We're going to ascend using the Dorian mode, 3 notes per string. Nails it using thirds as an interval scale. And then what I'm going to do is move back to the Ionian position and play the root inversion of a major 7. In this case, G major 7 in the Ionian position, 3rd fret. But in groups of 3. So I got some synergy going on there, but the most important thing is tension and release. I'm moving from the Dorian position that's got quite a bit of tension, and I sort of relieve the tension by moving back down to home base. The Ionian position, that's very important. And you have to practice that from the 3rd degree to the 1st degree, or the 3rd degree to the 6th degree. You can go the other direction where you start resolving to the minor chord at the 6th degree of a major scale, right? The natural minor. Another very sort of important sound, if you will, to master. There's the positive side, if you will. So moving from these minor chords to a major, but then there's moving from a minor chord to a more stable minor chord. Let's put it that way, right? So that's another sort of important skill that you have to exercise, and it falls under sort of this diatonic approach. And again, I'm trying to create sort of interesting ideas where I'm actually getting a little bit more out of the practice session. So I start messing with the approach. I don't just play the scale. Now I try to approach the scale using intervals, thirds or fourths or sixths or whatever it's going to be. And then from there, of course, I want to combine that. But I could obviously do the arpeggio in sixths. I do it later, of course, at the end. But the point here is I'm like, I can use this principle of 3, but just use groups of 3 now. So I can pair up this interval idea with a sequence, but using a different sort of system, an arpeggio rather than the scale. So again, you see this flip-flopping of the mindset where you have to align all these basic elements up and be like, play it like this, and then just do it. And that actually takes a lot of practice. That's why you're doing stuff like this. It's not just, oh, play the scale and then play the arpeggio. You'll get good at that pretty fast. The thing is to play the scale and then add this extra little bit of complexity and then move it to the arpeggio and then make a small alteration there that makes it a little bit more challenging in the next respect. Right. Next section. All right, in this one, we're hybridizing the major scale now, essentially from the Ionian position, converting it into 3-in-1, so we can use economy picking, and of course, moving into the first inversion major now as a major 9 at the Phrygian position, right? So that means start at the note G, 3rd fret, move to the 3rd degree of the G major scale, B, that's the 7th fret. Play a first inversion major triad as an arpeggio. Add in the 9th degree, and of course you see me doing another sequence, but I'm doing like a mixed sort of pattern, so they're not all groups of 3 now. It's like a group of 6 or 7 or something like that, or 5, I can't remember, and then a group of 4 and so on and so forth, and you just hear me kind of wrap it up, moving down the major scale kind of situation. But the important thing to take away here is this idea that if you just do scales all the time, without starting to mess with, you know, the core constituency of what a scale consists of, because you can start to use 3 octaves fragments pretty convincingly and use this technique as well. And I bet you that would be pretty devastating. So that's why I'm bringing it up, to essentially not give you the impression that you should just do it strictly with all these scales and the, you know, the strictest forms, and instead start to be like, well, what if I start combining it with like less sort of obvious ones, like say the Barry Harris approach to a diminished sixth scale would be true about it too, because now all of a sudden there's a spot where you have to actually change the pattern of notes to get it done properly. So it gets this bebop kind of feel. So once you start doing that, you're no longer just going strictly down and up. So you've now fundamentally changed the nature of the exercise, if you will. And that's what you're trying to do here, is break away from the other side where you're just doing regular scalar stuff, even if it's like in more fragmented forms like the harmonic minor or sometimes the melodic minor, right? So very important distinction there, because again, tunnel vision can sink you in the moment. You're like, oh, I should do this. And then you go to do it and you just crash and burn brutally. No fun, I can tell you from personal experience. Right, let's get into the last section. All right, this is where we get weird. Obviously, we're using the harmonic minor now from the Locrian position, and I move up to the Ionian position again. Notice how I'm doing a lot of stuff in the exact same position. I guess that's an overarching theme there, where you get this experience where you can get a whole lot of different flavors from the exact same position, which is going to be essential for later on when you're like, what hat should I put on today? During this solo section, you're like, oh, I hear this overtone. Time to break out Phrygian dominant. Right? Like, that's my whole point. If you can't really hear that, you can't play these scales and complement it and all the rest of that stuff. So you have to practice these exercises like in relation to the Ionian position, 16 ways from Sunday, using the Dorian resolution, using the Locrian resolution, coming from the harmonic minor or the melodic minor. It's so much more in depth than just learning some scale shapes and stuff like that. It's about combining these elements again, but now starting to recognize the subtle shift that is created when you move from one system to the other, like the harmonic minor now into the augmented arpeggio as a triad, just played at the Ionian position again, keeping it straight up. Right, and then I jump down again to the Locrian position. I play that sixth interval. That is a extra little music tool to take the tension off, of course, that augmented triad. If I just left it as augmented, it would sound pretty awkward. But by jumping down and then doing that sixth from the Locrian position, boom, I resolve it. And then, of course, it opens up for me to move right back into that major triad. Again, played as fifths and sixths, really, intervals, and then just ending in the Mixolydian position, again, using the two notes from the Mixolydian pentatonic. No big deal. But you see how juicy that sounds. So the big takeaway has to be, number one, pair up sounds that are sympathetic to each other, like the blues scale and dominant seven. Don't just play the pentatonic. Try to concentrate on using the bluesy version of the pentatonic or the bebop scale combined with the pentatonic and the dominant seven inversions, and just practice that everywhere you get a dominant seven inversion happening at a diatonic scale, right? So that's going to be at the 7th degree and the 2nd degree. You know these ones, the 5th degree, right? So, very important. The fourth degree, of course, is another one. This is very important information. You can start to see how once you start to master that, then you can start to apply these techniques all the way across the fretboard. It's no longer localized just to the first degree. You'd move up to the next position and be like, okay, I want to now do it in the next inversion there. What's that going to be? Where I use this harmonic minor and then jump into the dominant 7 arpeggio. You're just sort of using those two elements now to work the magic. And there it is. And there you can actually, again, see, you can just choose any two elements as long as they're going to share some sort of level of synergy, right? The dominant 7 and the harmonic minor scale are going to go good together, just like diminished is going to go well with harmonic minor. And then dominant 7, diminished work great with the diatonic scales, right? And the blues scale is going to work great with dominant 7 and also diminished. I think you're starting to notice a theme here. So practicing in those three realms, the diatonic scale, using dominant 7 as the sort of like resolving flavor, and then using diminished as the resolving flavor. And of course, there's one over here too. When we say diatonic, usually that means the major scale, but there's also the minor. I don't stress it enough because I kind of see it as part of the major scale, but I should say this, resolving these things to a minor chord is also incredibly important. So don't skip over that. Right, I've whinged on long enough. So take these practice exercises, start to factor them in, and come up with your own. Be like, I got to create a pattern. I got to do it in intervals. I got to use a sequence, right? I want to combine this scale and this arpeggio, a triad with the pentatonic, or the pentatonic with a dominant 7, whether that's major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, and minor 7 flat 5, all 4 groups, right? Not just the one. And so on and so forth. And I wish you all the best in your musical journeys. Never stop seeking. Never stop searching. Just keep looking for new horizons, new ways to apply this old information. I think you'll be surprised that you just keep coming up with newer and cooler versions of the stuff that you already have. And that's an incredibly useful tool too, because it builds up your music vocabulary to the point where you're just like absolutely devastating, which is what basically most people want. They want to be able to pick up the instrument and just play music and people be like, shit, yeah. See you in the next one.